Welcome to Abstracts. This week, eSports.
So what is an eSports competition? Well, you can think of it as a baseball game, a basketball game where you go and you watch sports, right? Except in this case, you're watching some of the best video gamers compete against each other up on big screens.
Would I consider League of Legends a sport? Yeah.
Fortnite is it's unlike any game out there.
The industry itself provides coaching jobs, analyst jobs.
We have mental coaches, we have sports psychologists, we have physical therapists. So there's an army of folks that are dedicated to making sure that these players up their performance.
They're competing for a $250,000 purse.
These are the iconic people. These are the titans. These are the celebrities of their field. Just like in Hollywood, just like in show business, you have people that are looked up to and admired, and these people are at the top of their game.
If these guys aren't exactly the kinds of athletes you pay good money to see, well, you probably wouldn't have been able to get a ticket anyway. There isn't an empty seat in the house.
My hand to God, I didn't know there were some. But my issue is, it's still not a sport.
Well,
it's a game.
How's that Jocko thing going, by the way?
Yeah, really well. I mean, I have come to the point now where I've stopped
Getting up at 4:30.
every day.
Yeah.
Most days. It is still most days, but it's not always every day. Like Saturday, I was like, I think I'll give my body what it needs.
Right.
And I'll lay in. But not every day.
So
But
what are
it's
you
good.
doing, Monday to Friday?
Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday and Sunday. So I was up at 4:30 this morning.
Okay.
I love it, mate. Like this morning, the trains don't go until like 7.
Right.
But I am...
It's dead on the streets.
Yeah, I was actually just playing PlayStation 4.
So you're getting up Jocko style to get after it, and what you're getting after is the PS4.
On the weekends. On the Sunday, absolutely.
What were you playing?
Far Cry 5.
Really?
Yeah,
Is it
yeah.
good?
It's good. It's starting to feel like hard work.
That's what it looks like to me. It looks like hard work. It looks like I'd enjoy the first maybe 2 hours of it, and then kind of be ready for the story to be finished, and the rest of it is just grinding.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, they've done a good job given the fact it's open world. There's not a lot of that shit in there. You know, when you have to do lots of inane missions. There's not a lot of that. And actually, when you drive from one side of the map to the other, you always just question whether you're going to get there, because there's always things going on down the road. There's always burning cars and hostages. It's everywhere. So it's quite fun, but at the moment, I'm like, fuck me. I need to hunt down grizzly bears and skin them and not damage the skin. This is fundamentally hard work. It's odd. I mean, I've got to the point now where, because I don't play online, because the problem I have with playing online is that there's no end. And I'm the classic sort of individual who'll just waste his entire life playing online. Mm-hmm. I won't do anything else.
Have you never played an MMORPG to any great
Yeah.
extent?
Yeah.
You have. So this is how you've come to this.
I used to
realisation.
be on RuneScape. You know RuneScape? Remember
RuneScape,
that?
yes, I do remember RuneScape.
I loved RuneScape.
What did you love about it?
I mean, at one point, you could buy property at one point, and I had a restaurant. And I employed people. So I was giving them the proceeds of this restaurant. I mean, I call it a restaurant. It's essentially a place where you can go and get, high caliber food.
Right.
The high caliber food being stuff you could use for your health and stuff, I guess.
And it gave you better health properties for your character, all that kind of
I
stuff.
can't really remember now, but I know I had some pretty, as they might call, pretty good inventory. And then
Did you enjoy more the managerial task of running this restaurant than actually playing the game itself?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm convinced it was because I was a kid. You get to a point where you just want to grow up. You want to go out into the real world, and this was my way of doing it. So I lost so many hours. So I had RuneScape, I had the Star Wars soundtrack playing, and that was kind of my life for months.
Did you get any, meaning from it?
Absolutely not.
None. It didn't give you any sense of meaning whatsoever, even at that age.
I don't think so.
What at the time did you enjoy about it?
I mean, it's interactive. There's other people on there.
Right.
You can talk to people. Yeah. You start sort of chatting to someone, and then it's against the rules, but then you start exchanging what at the time was a Pixo account. So it was like a free web page.
I've never even heard of Pixo. What's Pixo?
So it's a bit like, imagine MySpace, but without any of the structure, and you could drag and drop in GIFs, and it was budget. It was budget, is what it was.
I never actually played RuneScape.
How dare you?
I did play for a time. I played Warcraft, World of Warcraft.
Oh, did you? I always wanted to play Warcraft.
I was kind of made to do it. One, because there's very little else to do in the country. I was living in Kuwait at the time.
Oh, shit, okay.
And so video games were a good kind of escape. they were a good kind of like thing to do with your time, I guess.
Mm.
Because, when there's no bars, you could go out and drink coffee and stuff like that. There was stuff to do like that. But also, the person I worked for, my boss, loved it. We'd finish our work and he'd say, like, go and level. And like, I'd go in and he bought me my first pass. It was like almost like he was a pusher. They'd have this thing. I don't play it anymore. I don't know whether they still do it. But they'd have this thing every Wednesday that the servers would go down. And it'd have little things saying, like, everything in moderation, even World of Warcraft.
Really?
So even back then, that was... When was that? I guess it'd be around 2006. Yeah, so Wednesdays, I think it was Wednesday, one day a week, the servers go offline for Warcraft. And they have, I guess, they just look at the servers, make sure they're all working correctly, do any upgrades or anything like that.
Imagine you had, a shift pattern that you worked weekends, and that was one of your main days off that you'd be absolutely livid, wouldn't you?
And you were just addicted to WoW, you needed to play it then.
Yeah, you had 1 day to go in on it, 1.5 days, then you had half a day to think about it again.
But it is full of pointless tasks at the beginning. So you spend the first 20 levels are you shooting pigs.
Chickens in RuneScape.
Yeah.
The amount of chickens I put arrows into. Yeah. Honestly, such a waste of time. With Duel of the Fates on in the background.
Yeah, I never played anything bigger than that. I have had forays into first-person shooters, but I don't really enjoy first-person shooters so much. I find them a bit too intense.
Really?
Yeah.
What about it do you find intense?
That it is all happening at once.
Okay.
There's things running around. It's like, I don't know. It's too hectic. It's too busy.
Stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not an environment that I like playing games in.
Yeah.
I do like more removed, more third person. I do prefer real-time strategy.
I was going to say that.
That kind of thing.
Red Alerts, Age of Empires.
Age of Empires was the one.
That's classic.
Me and my mate Dave, we'd just sit at in evenings, they'd have them brilliant printed out, progressions through the ages, and you'd look at it and you'd be planning your strategy. You'd be like, oh yeah, so if we advance through this age, we'll get these catapults eventually, and we should pick that line of inquiry, or that line of research or something. That stuff was awesome.
So educational as well. Things like Genghis Khan.
Right.
People always had this impression of me when I was younger that I was really good at
Genghis
history.
Khan.
No, thankfully not. Thankfully not. But people had this impression that I knew quite a lot about history. I'd sort of go to a museum. Oh, there's a trebuchet. You recognise all these things from the game.
True. Yeah, you'd know what a trebuchet was.
Yeah, and kind of what the function of a lot of the
what a siege was playing the way in game.
Exactly. You had Joan of Arc as well, and you get some history around it. I thought it was really educational. I mean, not as good as me sitting down and reading an actual piece of history, but if I could be playing anything, it's better playing that.
Was it you who was telling me a while ago about Assassin's Creed?
Which one?
There was one where it's in, is it Florence? It could have very well been Owen, my mate Owen.
Maybe.
It sounds like an Owen thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll have to put it out to him. And I've never really competed. It's too hectic.
So I did it for a little while, and actually it made me bloody good at Quasar.
What's Quasar?
How dare you? Quasar.
What's Quasar?
Laser tag.
Oh, right. Laser tag. We had Laser Quest.
Laser Quest.
Yeah,
okay, fine.
It was Laser Quest.
Quasar was really big in my area, and I know it was across the country as well, but we had Quasar. But what happened was, me and a few of my friends, we started... I mean, it was the wrong game for it, fundamentally, but we went on to... I think it was Gamer Leagues. Leagues, I think it was called at the time. But we went on there. It was... I guess you'd call it, in scare quotes, a professional gamer league, or people aspiring to be professional. And
as in video games? Or
yeah, it's video games.
Laser Quest? No,
video games. But what happened was we were playing Call of Duty 4.
Right.
And so then what happened was we were like, okay, how do we get better at this? So we started reading these manuals, the best available evidence of how the SAS operates.
Right.
How the SAS clear rooms and all this sort of thing. So we had our point man, we had our flanks, we had a unit, like the SAS. And when we were clearing rooms, we had it. I might have this wrong, but the point man facing the door, they go in first. You have two people on either side of the door that focus on the corners, on the inner side, on the same wall as the door, and they rush in afterwards. There's a way of clearing a room, and there's multiple different ways of clearing rooms, and there's smoke bombs and flashbangs, but there's ways of doing it, this process, and so we had this process. And so the problem was it's too arcadey, right? So actually, we were really good at clearing rooms when we were doing that, but in general, in terms of moving through the map, you could still get these people that were throwing grenades from a distance and, jumping around, and the arcadey bit kind of beat us, and we couldn't get over that.
Right.
But when we went to Quasar, or laser tag, there we were with a load of strangers, and we just cleared the rooms the same way. So we had the same process.
So you were emulating like the way that a Navy SEAL would clear a room.
Yeah, just
in Quasar.
One was ginger, and two looked like they were clearly IT geeks. But we were clearing rooms like absolute dons, and I think we honestly we had the highest score in that room. We dominated.
But getting back to RuneScape, so you never got any meaning from RuneScape?
I don't think so. I mean, I might have had faux meaning.
How did you justify it to yourself, is my question.
Oh, it was just good fun. It was better than the alternative. As soon as I got Xbox Live, that's what I was doing.
What were you playing on Xbox Live?
Well, Xbox before Live, it was Tom Clancy.
Rainbow Six.
I think it was Ghost Recon Modern Warfare 2, I think it would have been at the time. It was clearly modeled on Iraq. It was one of these kind of environments. But then I started moving into Call of Duty 4. I mean, I sound like a bit of a sociopath. I mean, I also had like, what was it, Pinata? You know that Pinata
So
game?
RuneScape was your gateway?
It's a gateway drug.
It was the gateway game.
Yeah. It was really not good for me. Halo was a big one. Halo 3.
Halo was massive. Everybody played Halo.
Loved Halo. I loved the level design element. The creativity of the level design. That was really nice.
It was a game changer, man. I remember once I used to be in a band when I was a teenager. Sick ass band. But in the rehearsal studios that we went to, the guy who ran that is DOA Studios in Bolton. So if you are in a band and you're in Bolton, go DOA Studios. It's brilliant. We had like basically a huge LAN party. There would have been about 30 of us, 40 of us, like 10 TVs, a whole bunch of Xboxes, all wired together, and we're all sat round in like armchairs, playing it. And that's how it would have happened. It wasn't online so much as it was you'd have to bring your electronic devices to one room, all your Xboxes to one room. They were big back then, they weren't small. And I don't know how they got all them TVs up there as well. It was a concerted effort from about like 20 odd blokes to fill a room with televisions and Xboxes, and it was brilliant. And you all connected it together, and it was fantastic.
Yeah.
And in that setting, in the room, it was less intense for me. I enjoyed it more.
I mean, maybe this is similar to in South Korea. They have these PC cafes. And actually, when you see some of these teams go there, they are chatting amongst themselves. But do you not find that in that environment, it still does draw you back to the game that you're playing?
You do get involved in the game because you're in the room. In that,
Yeah.
it does. The impact of me being at the bottom of the leaderboard every single time was less. It was just fun. It was fun with your mates. It didn't matter that I was the worst one, or that I couldn't really get to grips with it. And then if I got 6 kills, like that was like amazing. And you'd be like applauded for it rather than just like someone shit talking you down a microphone on the other side of the planet in a language you can't understand.
You find some 11-year-old, like you say, shit talking you.
Exactly, some child. That's the other thing, is like online is just so full of bile. I saw some videos for Rainbow Six Siege, and just the bile coming out of people's mouths was like truly disgusting.
I mean, you can still have
really
your own.
bad.
You can still have your own lobbies. Maybe that's the way forward. I when I played Grand Theft Auto 4 online, you had your own lobby, and that was great fun. It was you and a few people that you chose to be there.
Yeah.
And you
can still do that, but I mean,
you shoot the shit with them. It's good fun.
That's it. But you need everybody to be in that place, like happy to play the game. They all need to own the game. For that to truly work, you all need to be friends in real life first.
Oh yeah, well I mean at the time that's what it was for me. So I was at school, we were all friends.
And you enjoyed the socialising aspect of it.
100%. I mean, Xbox Live was so great for that because, you'd go to school, you'd talk about Xbox Live from the night before, you'd go home, still with your mates, fun stuff would take place, and then the next day you hash it out with them again.
It was an extension of your social life.
It was an extension, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Instead of going down to the disused railway by my house, Xbox put an end to that. This is it, health and safety, Taken away the risk and replaced it with Tetris Elbow, whatever it is.
Tetris, oh yeah.
Pac-Man Elbow.
Pac-Man Elbow, yeah. Pac-Man Elbow.
Tetris Wrist, I think it was.
Nintendonitis.
No, I'm thinking of Tetris Effect.
Tetris Effect.
Have you heard about this?
I've heard about this game, but I don't know what Tetris Effect is. What's Tetris Effect?
It's when you actually start... So it was essentially a form of dysphoria, I guess. Mm-hmm. You actually start not being able to dissociate between the game and the real world. And so it's called Tetris Effect because initially people were seeing Tetris blocks during the day.
In place of objects.
It was just... They were hallucinating Tetris blocks.
Just falling from the sky in front of them. I mean, removing aspects of reality.
Exactly, but now it's happening with Minecraft as well. Kids are talking about the fact they can't dissociate from the game. They're sitting in class. I mean, there's some interesting articles where these teachers are talking about, these kids staring into space, and they've
Did you
asked
find any
them.
papers on that? Any actual journals, or is it more just articles?
No, I didn't look into Tetris Effect. There are articles out there about Tetris Effect, but I didn't sort of go too deep into it. But there's some real pathology literature on this.
That's crazy.
But there's some really scary anecdotal stuff of teachers saying, the kids staring off into space. They ask them what they think, what's up, what's wrong, and they say, I can't get the blocks out of my head. And you go, I mean.
So they're daydreaming Minecraft.
Yeah, you start worrying about about the effect of video games in those sorts of people. It's only a few people where it will happen. It's only extreme overexposure. But if the people that are worried about video game violence, you'd imagine they'd be really worried about these individuals, because there is an open question there. Like, if you're seeing Tetris blocks and Minecraft blocks in real life, where does that end? If someone's really into GTA, what are they seeing? Are they just depersonalizing people? The same way you depersonalize the hookers in the game? I don't know.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you can literally proposition beat up hookers and take the money off them.
It's a concern, but yeah, Tetris Effect, that's what I was thinking of, not Pac-Man Elbow.
Oh yeah, by the way, this is about eSports.
Yeah. We've really come around to the topic, haven't we?
Yeah, we did, but it was a nice little thing. We are sat here currently. Welcome to the episode, everyone. This is the pilot episode of Abstract, and as you probably tell by the intro and by what we've been joshing about, we're in the world of video games for this pilot episode. We're going to be looking mainly at esports, but first we should talk about the gin that we're drinking. What are we drinking, Matt?
We're drinking Drury 173 gin liqueur. You know what? It's actually very, very nice.
It is actually pretty good, isn't it?
It is pretty good. Recipe number 23, rhubarb and ginger.
Rhubarb and ginger. So presumably there are another 22 recipes.
One would hope.
Unless it's the 23rd recipe of rhubarb and ginger that they got right.
Yeah, well, allegedly got right.
Right.
I mean, we'll leave that up to anybody else to decide, but I'm quite enjoying it.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? £14 from your local Sainsbury's. We are not being sponsored by this company. We had to buy it.
We did, yes. I refused to have Gordon's. So.
Yeah, that's right. It took us 3 supermarkets before Matt finally agreed on the Jury 173.
I nearly sent you to a 4th, didn't I?
Yeah, exactly. That was a 15-minute walk away, and he couldn't be bothered sparing the leg energy, so we settled on the rhubarb.
I think it's a good settlement, though.
It's pretty nice, isn't it?
I'm not a big fan of rhubarb or ginger, in fact.
But together.
Together, it's another thing entirely, isn't it?
It's a decent combination.
20% volume. I'm actually having it straight.
You are having it straight.
Without ice. And you know what? There's not a big kick on it.
No, it's the rhubarb and ginger that man.
Really
It's
nice.
taking the edge off.
Yeah, yeah. Went to the British Museum the other day.
It has to be British,
it's
doesn't
an
it?
assortment. Yeah, well, it is all British at this point. It's just, you have to date it back to the colonial era. Sort of the Egyptian stuff that we stole off the French who found it first. I mean, it really...
The French did not find Egypt first. Bolton found Egypt first.
Bolton?
Boltonians, yeah. I'll leave you to ponder that. What was that news article you were telling me earlier that was going to kick us off?
Yeah, the Intel one.
Yeah, the Intel sponsorship.
Yeah, it's on Forbes. It's interestingly worded. Intel has agreed to sponsor the Intel World Opens. Essentially, it's an Olympics-sponsored or Olympics-sanctioned eSports event on the run-up to the Tokyo Olympics in 2020.
So it's not actually an Olympic event.
No, but it's sanctioned by the Olympics.
Right.
They've got the buy-in of the Olympic Commission. So one would imagine it's only a matter of time before they start wondering, should we be integrating this into the actual Olympic Games? Because it's got more viewers than basketball in the US. I mean, I've got a report here. There's an Activate Global Media Outlook report. I've got the 2017 one, the 2019 one wouldn't load. Mm-hmm. But it's an interesting track over the years. I mean, they actually don't have the numbers on here. It's all relative to each other. But in 2015, eSports had a viewership somewhere between NHL and Major League Baseball. The NBA, between NBA and NHL. And since 2015, it's actually usurped NBA, it's usurped Major League Baseball, and it's coming for the NFL. You've now got 88 million viewers.
And this is esports collectively, or is it a particular...
This is the US. This is the collective esports. It's no particular game. It's just esports collectively. They are cheating a little bit. It's more like the Olympics esports, isn't it? There's so many games under that umbrella.
Yeah, right.
So we're cheating slightly.
Some people call them disciplines in the literature.
Do they?
Yeah, that's what I find. So the discipline of Counter-Strike.
God.
Or the discipline of Dota 2. for example.
I shouldn't laugh. I mean, it's I guess it is a discipline.
Who knows?
Who knows? But we got to the point recently where just the last fact and figure from this report here, it had about 99 million viewers. The World Championship final of, I think it was Fortnite or maybe it was League of Legends. I could find it, but it had 99 million viewers.
Okay, so this is from a report in 2016 called Virtually Athletes. Where do esports fit into the definition of sport? This is the Seth Jenny one. And in that, he quotes someone called Wingfield in 2014. I didn't look up who this Wingfield person is, but according to them, 70 million people watch esports on the net or on television. That was in 2013. In 2013 itself, 8.5 million people watched League of Legends Championship, and that was the same as the Stanley Cup, which is basically the penultimate game of the championship for the NHL, or National Hockey League. They expect it could grow up to something like 30 million odd viewers.
Are we looking at US there?
That's the Stanley Cup, so potentially USA, Canada.
Because I've got some global viewership figures here. In 2016, there were, Activate's forecast there was about 270 million viewers globally. Because we shouldn't forget that the hub of this is in South Korea.
Right.
And Asia. So, although it might not seem so prevalent here, in South Korea, it's a huge, huge industry. By 2018, 411 million. And it's forecast that by next year, they'll be approaching 500 million fans of esports.
That's just truly bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amount of viewers that we can't really comprehend. And the point that's being made in this entire sort of industry report is the only problem they're having at the moment is monetizing those views. Because when you think about pay-per-view, the really kind of mature sports industry and sponsorships that goes along with that, with things like NBA and American football and FIFA in the UK, you can monetize those views. There's pay-per-view, there's turning up to the stadiums, there's
television, broadcasting, advertising.
All of that.
Yeah.
But they haven't done that yet, or they haven't managed to do that with Twitch, YouTube. It's not the same model.
I've noticed when I have watched the Evo fighting games, it's called Evo, they have some commercials for stuff like NVIDIA graphics chips and various gaming headsets and certain things like that.
So they have managed to get a lot of these sponsors that are native to the industry on board, or native to the actual activity of gaming, but they haven't got the others. So they've got a few, like I think Coca-Cola. I've got a report here that says there's the difference between there's endemic and non-endemic sponsors. So the endemic sponsors are the ones that, like I say, are in the industry.
Right.
Like Twitch, Alienware, Logitech, IGN, Microsoft, Sony. They will all sponsor this. And there's a few non-endemic ones, like Coke, Red Bull, obviously.
I was going to say that, like McDonald's sponsor the Olympics, for example.
Or Mountain Dew is a big one as well.
Yeah.
Classic. And you've got a few on this report that are saying unlikely to join. And there's a few big names there that just really are not related at all. But that's where they haven't really managed to capture the sponsorship. Like the Olympics, like you say.
That's crazy.
Subway. Wasn't Subway sponsoring the London Olympics?
That's the thing. Like things like these fast food chains, you'd wonder why, why Doritos wouldn't just jump on that.
Yeah.
Or Snickers, or any kind of munchy food.
Yeah,
you know
absolutely. Well, I'm sure they have.
Like this kind of thing. It's interesting you bring up South Korea because in the West, in Europe, and in America, we associate the rise of esports to roughly the early 90s and to first-person shooters when Doom came out in 93. Which then led to Quake in 96, and then very quickly clans emerge. When playing Quake, you have clans that kind of compete together online. This one particular paper that I've got is by a guy called Michael Wagner. He frames esports in quite an interesting way. He gives a little bit of a history about how in the West we associate it with the rise of the first-person shooter. By 97, the Cyber Athletic Pro League was established, and then people were playing Quake more and more, but then in 99, Counter-Strike was released by Valve as an extension of Half-Life, and that quickly came to dominate the market in around 99. It's argued that esports really began in South Korea when telecoms were liberalized effectively or deregulated. There was a huge growth in broadband infrastructure, and this broadband infrastructure needed content. It made sense for companies to broadcast on channels video games events. Eastern cultures prefer MMORPGs. Yeah. Western cultures prefer first-person shooters. which is kind of interesting, and that also bleeds into team games and solo games and stuff like that. But that's from the Wagner one in 2006.
I mean, for anyone listening, MMORPGs, massively multiplayer online role-playing games.
Exactly. So you're talking your World of Warcrafts.
Yeah.
Is RuneScape one of those?
Absolutely.
Okay, RuneScape.
Yeah, I loved it.
Stuff like that. He has an interesting quote here. So here's how Wagner talks about esports. He basically says, the emergence of esports can thus be interpreted as a logical and irreversible consequence of a transition from an industrial society to an information and communication-based society of today.
Cool, sounds very grand, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? He very much inflates it. He inflates like the act of playing games.
Yeah, but that's just sociological literature, isn't it, in general?
Yes.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
although I must say, I agree. I've been reading some Wagner as well, and it's good stuff. That's some real good social psychology there.
The earliest reliable source, this is from the same paper, the Wagner 2006 paper, was from a guy called Matt Bettington from Eurogamer.
Bettinson, I believe.
Bettingson. Was it Bettingson?
Bettinson, yeah. Matt Bettinson, yeah.
Oh, I put Bettington. Whoops, my mistake. Sorry, Matt.
Sorry, Matt.
And that was in some press release for the OGA, which is the Online Games Association. And in that same year, in 1999, the UK PC Gaming Authority tried to have games recognised as an official sport in the UK. It failed. Yeah.
That was a bad year.
It was a bad year
esports.
in 99.
Yeah.
That was 20 years ago.
I mean, do you remember reading Eurogamer? That was huge back in the day.
Eurogamer was big.
Eurogamer, that's who Matt Bettinson worked for, and that's who was dealing with all of this. Who was dealing with the OGA, and I think they actually set it up. It was huge, Eurogamer.
Not
anymore.
No. Is it still going? Is it just online?
It is. I think it is still going, yeah, but now it's all the IGNs and the GameSpots, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. What this particular paper ultimately leads to is he looked specifically at how fast-paced first-person shooters, and how it could possibly be utilized in jobs that require high-speed decision-making. He says to foster the importance of competitive games for high-speed decision-making in management training.
Okay, that's interesting.
So I don't know how that would cross over.
Yeah, I mean there is some research, and I can't cite this because it's not part of what we've been looking at, but I mean I know there is some research in the leadership literature that shows that if you look at CEO performance, it's not the quality of decisions they make. I mean, the quality has to be sufficiently high, but it's not actually correlated, or firm performance isn't correlated that strongly with the quality of decision making. It's actually speed of decision making. So yeah, I mean, if you could improve speed of decision making, that would be very useful for a firm. But I'm not necessarily convinced that you're improving the right sort of decision making. I mean, there are some studies on this about, the neural impacts of gaming. There is a lot of evidence that it thins the cerebral cortex. It thins certain parts of the brain, like the hippocampus, like the frontal gyri, and so basically the frontal lobe, the basal ganglia. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that it's not great for decision making. There's other evidence that shows at the highest level that esports athletes actually have thicker cortices. So, yeah, maybe the people right at the top, they're going to have improved decision making, improved cognition. But for the general population that are engaged in video gaming, there's a lot of conflicting evidence about how good that is for you.
Then how can you actually apply that to a real life situation unless you were to put them in some kind of real life environment where things were popping out at them? It only really seems to work for the game environment.
It's very hard to tell whether there's any kind of peripheral benefits. We were talking earlier about Quasar, but there's another good example of things that have bled out into the real world. I remember when I was... So, can you drive? Do you drive?
Yes.
Yeah, so... It was always common knowledge amongst people that were talking to me about learning to drive that, it's apparently really counterintuitive to turn into a skid. So, when you skid out, it's really counterintuitive. Right, okay. However, I basically grew up playing racing games. I spent the entirety of my life turning into skids. Okay, it was my left thumb turning into the skid. But I remember, as clear as day, I skidded on some ice, and I turned into it just instinctively. I thought, there's no way. I mean, that was so instinctual for me. I sort of controlled the skid immediately. I thought, well, yeah, my mind knows that directionally I have to go that way. Although it's not, my thumb. It's now my two hands and the steering wheel. Directionally, my brain knows that I have to go into it. I have to steer into the skid. And so I did it perfectly well, And so that was a skill from the game that bled out into the real world. So I'm sure there are a lot of things that bleed out, but
there's
I mean,
also
it's very
a 50%
hard.
chance that you would have gone the other way.
There is, but it was the feeling of the instinctual nature.
And
of
how
the
many
turning
people who
in.
don't play video games turn correctly on a skid?
I mean, you're right. It's an anecdote.
You know what I mean? That's the thing.
It's an anecdote, although, you know, I didn't accidentally clear rooms in Quasar with SAS tactics. So, I mean, I don't know. That just felt like something where I thought, you know, well, it does bleed out into the real world in some way, but it's hard to know whether all the good things are going to bleed out or whether it's going to, you know, whether it's going to be a mix. Like you were talking earlier about like Call of Duty or things like that where you're in it and you're just overcome with stimuli.
That's it. It's too much.
You know, that's all very well in a game, but then let's say you get a job and you have to sit at a desk and focus on something. Yeah, now it's going to be difficult for you. If your brain has topologically formed around the idea that it has to be open to all stimuli at all times, just in case it's someone hopping over the fence with a gun, then you're going to find it really, really hard then to focus down on one task.
Maybe that's what separates people, is they can just focus down on one task, ignore all the other superfluous stuff around them.
Yeah.
And just focus on that one task.
I mean, I was reading a literature review on Frontiers. It's very difficult to know because if you look at attention, there's evidence for and against. Does it improve it? Does it decrease your attention? You know, fundamentally, it's very, very hard to know what video games do to you.
Yeah, right.
What it does to the makeup of your brain. But there is some good evidence that there are some worrying effects for people that are constantly gaming.
Funny you bring that up because the one that I was just reading was one called Features of Mental Activities of Students.
Okay.
From the International Journal of Cognitive Research in Science, Engineering and Education. That's from this year. The purpose of this research was so much focuses on the effects of attention, perception, you know, almost physiological responses to stimuli coming in. How good, how successful are you at doing that?
Yeah.
But very little really focus on thinking. Like how good is playing a video game for a prolonged amount of time helping you develop your thinking skills?
Yeah.
This study found that actually it doesn't.
Right.
What it did was it took basically sets of students. It ended up with a sample size of 70 people.
Okay.
40 of them played in eSports competitions and engaged in eSports. The rest of them didn't. It basically run 4 tests. It run an intelligence structure test, which is by a guy called Rudolf Amthauer.
Okay.
Whose name I am probably absolutely
Butchering.
destroying.
Yeah,
Butchering, yeah. It's called the IST, and it was developed in 1953, and that consists of 9 subtests within it. And it's supposed to measure things like the success of educational activity, help kind of people choose what trade or profession they're kind of going to go into based on their educational level. And also like the success, it's supposed to be a predictor of success in professional occupation as well. So, but specifically for occupations that require special intellectual skills.
Okay.
So that's one of them, the intelligence structure test. Then it does a test of critical thinking. And that I found out is actually from a book called Critical Thinking Skills. And this is 35 questions aimed at figuring out, or they call it diagnosing, your ability at critical thinking already. 35 questions, but it's multiple choice. And there's 4 choices. Then they do one on thinking style and then a brief indicative test. What's interesting about the intelligence structure test is the subtests. Things like analogies and arithmetic tasks and generalization tasks or excluding word tasks, things like that. And what they actually found, I've only got a couple of the results here, but for the logical thinking, it's relatively lower in people who engage in esports than those who don't engage in esports. The other people, it's not that they don't play video games, it's just that they're not engaged in esport competition.
That's interesting.
And so the subtests basically assess the development of conceptual thinking operations. So like the inner meaning of certain sentences or sentiments and things like that. And this is and it's like an ability to discard unnecessary information for necessary information, which is essential for scientific research, things like that.
Yeah.
And they're lower in that.
Jeez.
They have a lower level of development. So it raises this kind of controversial question, like you were saying, whether games actually develop or block cognitive development.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I bring that back to the neural impacts, it's very similar to what you're saying there in terms of executive function. It's actually hard to know what it does, but I told you a minute ago about the study by Hiroku Takuchi. Rather. Again, another name I'm probably butchering, apologies. But he works in Tohoku University in Japan, and he had this study, the impact of video game play on the brain's microstructural properties. And basically what he's showing is that the microstructural properties of the brain, let's just call it cortical thickness, is thinning for some really key areas of the brain. These are areas implicated in memory, in sleep, executive function, like, for example, planning and the ability to meet goals, working memory, reward and motivation processes are implicated. So you kind of go, oh, well, that's all the bad things. Yeah, sure. Okay, there's another study by Simon Kuhn of the University Clinic Hamburg-Eppendorf. And he, in his study, it's a 2014 study, basically shows there is higher tissue density in esports players in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which essentially is implicated in higher cognitive functions, but it's specifically about attention switching. If you think about attention switching, that's a very key component. For example, the Call of Duty 4 thing earlier on, you said there's too much going on. Yeah, you have to be aware of all things at all times. So the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, that's what it's doing. And the left frontal eye fields as well are also thickening. And that's responsible for selective visual processing. But it's not necessarily about the top-down control of you selecting. It's involved in that, but it's more reactive. And so, there's a study that says that it knows where but not what. So it's about being able to switch your attention really quickly, and then also it's about being able to know where things are in your environment. So those things are improved in esports players. But the ability to, for example, get to sleep and remember the things you need to remember, probably for school, they're degraded. And your reward and motivation processes are fairly well degraded as well by the constant just influx of variable rewards. This is how slot machines work, right?
Yes.
I think about Minecraft. You're constantly digging, and you never know where the ore is going to be, or where the treasure is going to be, and it's always in variable magnitudes. You're going to get a lot of ore in this place, less ore in the other place. That's exactly how slot machines work. It's a variable reward schedule, which is known to be one of the most addictive types of scheduling device you can employ with somebody. So, yeah, there's a lot of literature on the addiction properties of gaming.
Yeah, the stuff to do with video games and slot machines I read goes back 25 years.
Yeah.
In one journal. That goes back quite a long way. That's mentioned in the Griffiths work from Nottingham quite a bit as well.
Yeah, he wrote in 91 about amusement machine playing. Machine playing in... God, the gin's really having an effect on me. Childhood and adolescence. He did a follow-up 2 years later, but then I sort of thought, well, this is a long time ago. But he's written another article in 2017 called The Psychosocial Impact of Professional Gambling, Professional Video Gaming and Esports. And, he calls out addiction there. He does also say, though, that actually it might be worth applying the workaholism lens. Because when we're talking about esports, we are essentially talking about work at this point.
Motivations actually can drop off.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know what those motivations are, because from the studies that I've looked at, those motivations differ depending on the age you are.
Okay.
The kind of game you're playing, and kind of what's important to you.
Yeah.
Within that game.
Right. Okay. So what have you seen?
If you feel like you're not thinking as much in general life, and you know that you play over 4 hours a day, and it's like, even if you are a professional esports player, that accounts for a couple of hundred people out of tens of thousands.
Yeah. Or millions.
Or millions, that are playing and that are streaming or that are twitching themselves. This was a point that Jenny made
Seth.
Yeah, good old Seth Jenny in 2016 when he was talking about Gutman's explanations of what makes a sport and what makes something a game.
So I guess the first question is esports sports? So have you changed your mind since the last time? We had a brief discussion about this before. Have you changed your mind?
No.
You haven't?
No. I still don't think it's a sport.
How dare you?
However, I guess I'm less strict.
Oh, you're softer these days, aren't you?
I've softened my stance.
Okay.
However,
yeah,
I do still think it's not a sport. Because I think that it really ultimately boils down to whether or not you need to physically overcome an opponent.
Right, okay. So Ronnie O'Sullivan, he's definitely not a sportsman.
Not a sportsman.
Okay. Dance players?
Not sportsman.
Dance, definitely not.
Dance?
You seem so surprised. Like Strictly Come Dancing, like graded dance. It's very physical.
Yes, probably. Oh, like
It is a sport?
break dancing would probably be a sport.
Yeah, but there's another question here about, if it's choreographed, like nothing's actually happening in the moment.
Okay, but if you're break dancing,
If you're breakdancing,
then
yeah,
it is.
The play,
It is
the
happening
play
in the
is
moment,
taking
isn't
place
it?
in the
It's
moment.
more like it's more of an improvisation, more like a kind of rap battle, more like a poetry jam.
Is rap battling a sport?
No, it's a contest. It's an intellectual contest.
Well, let me introduce what you mentioned a minute ago.
Okay.
A minute ago about Gutman.
Getting ahead of ourselves. Yeah,
Alan Gutman, sports historian, lecturer on American literature, but funnily enough teaches sports and society and another course at the Nazi Olympics at Amherst College. So, I mean, if I had the time and the money, I'd be over there. Cause that
Which
sounds
college?
Amherst.
Amherst, yeah.
Sounds fascinating, but he wrote the book From Ritual to Record, The Nature of Modern Sports in 1978. And it's, well, if you look online for this, you'll see loads of lecture slides. I mean, it's a real kind of seminal piece of work. And he says that essentially there's 4 stages. A sport has to first of all be play, and then you say, okay, is it spontaneous or is it organized? Okay, well, if it's organized, then it's a game. So organized play is a game. Okay, now is it competitive or non-competitive? Okay, if it's competitive, then it's now a contest. So you've got competitive organised play. You're in a contest. Now the last stage is it intellectual or is it physical? Now if it's physical, it's a sport, says Gutman. If it's intellectual, well, it's simply an intellectual contest. So chess would fit into that category.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really struggle to see where darts would fit in. Snooker, sure. Snooker, trigonometry, intellectual, geometric application, I can see that, but darts, I struggle with that. But so this is where he draws his distinction.
It requires
Intellectual,
some mathematical
physical.
skills, though, darts.
Yeah, but you can say that about walking. There's some, a sports scientist, there's a lot of maths involved in gait analysis. Put one leg in front of the other. Throwing a dart. I mean, you can really reduce.
Yeah, but you're not just throwing the dart and hoping for the best. You're weighing up their points, your points, where you need to be, and then you're throwing to those numbers to make those numbers.
Not sure. Yeah, okay. Intellectual might be the wrong word, I guess. It's cognitive, I guess.
It's definitely a concept.
They're doing some adding up.
They are doing some adding up. The reckoning as they go. It's like, they're on a market stand selling cauliflowers. And that's what it is,
Yeah. Well, there you go. So cauliflower throwers, intellectual contest. But physical, if it's physical, it's a sport. Yeah?
Mm.
So what the devil is an e-sport doing then? Is that an intellectual contest? Because we just spoke earlier on about Pac-Man elbow. I mean, you can get injured doing esports.
You can.
And God forbid I tell you to do a virtual reality contest.
Yeah, but we're not doing virtual reality contests, are we?
How dare you? I was at Hyper Japan, the Kensington Olympia, during the summer. And apparently Hyper Japan used to be much more cultural. It's a big expo about Japanese culture. And I spoke to somebody there and they said, it's actually changed over the years and it's much more about the cosplay and the gaming. Like Nintendo has a great big booth there. But they had this, I wouldn't call it a field, but there was a big old area. It was like a pitch. A pitch is the right word. And they all had their VR headsets on. And you could watch, as a spectator, you could watch on the screen what was going on. So you could see like a video camera capturing the people, but then also what they were seeing as well. And it was fascinating. They were throwing fireballs of some description, or virtual fireballs at each other, and there were things flying around in front of them, and it was 2 teams. So there's one team on one side, throwing at a team on the other side. And as far as I was concerned, that's a virtual reality sport at that point, because it's play, which is organised, competitive and physical at that point. And I was like, well, that would be a sport.
It still doesn't exist in physical reality.
Well, it does, because actually they are throwing their arm in physical reality.
But the rules of the game don't exist in physical reality. They exist in virtual reality.
Well, the rules of the game exist just by virtue of the rules existing. What you're saying is half of the physical nature of what's going on is not perceivable to the spectators, is what you're saying.
Yes. And that's a big part of it, is there's the spectator, is the audience.
But if you're watching the TV screen, you can see it all.
That's true.
Yeah, I mean, I'm convinced that would be a sport. Now, I take your point on the thumbs
That
jiggling
may be
around.
a sport.
If you took, let's just say you take the England squad, you put some VR headsets on them, and the ball just happens to not exist in the real world, but they're still pelting up and down the wings and, striking on goal and all the rest of it.
Okay.
I mean, it must fundamentally still be a sport.
Here's what this guy called Bernard Joux says.
Okay.
He's a French guy. In 1972, he wrote this thing called What is Sport? I couldn't find the actual full text. It was impossible to find. It was behind some crazy paywalls, and I couldn't find it anywhere to find the full thing. So what I've actually got, the extraction that I have, comes from this Virtually Athletes paper by Seth E. Jenny. Basically, what you were saying is that sporting competition is unique, and it means overcoming your opponent, right? It exists in the realm of physical reality. So you must overcome your opponent physically.
Having said that, though, you said it's 1972 it was written in.
Yeah, 1972.
Yeah.
So physical reality means pressing one's limits. Like, for example, earlier on today I was watching the rugby. There's no doubt in my mind that that is a sport.
Why?
Because they're overcoming someone physically.
And when you're saying overcoming, do you mean kind of, because they're throwing people on their heads, or can it just be that you're Ronnie O'Sullivan and you are physically overcoming in terms of, you're physically better at hitting the ball than the other person?
So when you're a footballer and you make a strike against a goalkeeper and you beat the goalkeeper, you're physically overcoming that person.
Okay.
Because that person, you don't have to be touching them, but that goalkeeper has to physically, jump, intercept a physical thing that exists physically in reality.
Yeah.
In your example, there may be intercepting digital things, but there's nothing in reality. So the parameters by which their body are moving are still limited by the parameters of the game.
Yeah, I guess it is. It depends what you call reality, because in some sense, the VR headsets are real things that are connected to a silicon motherboard, which is real and exists in the world. It's just we have a real clear understanding of what we think real is.
The headset, they're not throwing the motherboard. They're not. These are. They're the things that you kind of need to make that virtual reality environment exist.
Okay.
But within the game itself, it's a fireball. It's whatever.
It could be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
So if I said to you that you find out tomorrow that we're in the Matrix, so it turns out our bodies are somewhere else, does that now mean that the Premiership League is not a sport?
Well, apparently a lot of people disagree with me, even including American colleges.
Yeah, well, this is it.
American colleges disagree with me. So, what's interesting here is that in 2014, Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh was the first university to offer gaming scholarships. Pikeville in Kentucky did exactly the same thing, and it does this based on perceived benefits. And there's three outlined by Jenny in his paper.
Yeah.
First is the money, is that it's hugely profitable. As we've explored, the viewership is huge.
Yeah.
The only thing they're not really bridging right yet is the... What did you call it? The kind of sponsorship, the kind of advertising?
Oh, endemic and non-endemic.
So they haven't nailed the non-endemic advertising yet.
Yeah.
But it's hugely profitable. It says here the potential encouragement of physical activity. But it's kind of only potential in future games that involve movement, so involve this kind of VR kind of thing. The other perceived benefit is that it increases diversity within athletics departments. So in America, there's a huge push for all kind of departments or all education establishments to have diversity within their departments. In athletic departments, certain cultures are underrepresented. So say, for example, Koreans in American football are underrepresented, but it's going to be difficult to get Koreans to play American football. But one thing Koreans do really play is video games.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, it improves diversity primarily amongst Korean and Asian Americans who don't play other sports. So that's an equity and diversity issue. But these are perceived benefits. So they don't agree with me. The education establishments don't agree with me for many reasons, but it just doesn't feel like very many sporting reasons. Yeah, and the other thing is another little anecdote, is that one of my friends is a teacher in Leeds, and he sent me this picture the other day on WhatsApp, and it's a Nintendo Switch. And it turns out that his school has one of the most successful schools in eSports in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, man. No. And I did some more research, and their team won some Rocket League championship. Now they've got a Switch. He's got to play this Switch.
That's incredible. So schools are doing this.
Schools are doing this. But this is what's interesting, because if there are benefits that are attention, perceptual, all this kind of stuff, but it doesn't help thinking, critical thinking, logical thinking, then what's the use within an education establishment? And this is the other delineation with sport. What I'd really need to find out to really kind of back it up is whether or not engaging in sport improves critical thinking and improves logical decision making.
Yeah, there is still a point there, though, that you're not going to spend as much time practicing your rugby or your football as you are able to sit in front of your Xbox or PlayStation.
Some kids do spend all that time playing football. Some kids do, well, like I imagine would. You've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, I mean, but then you can start talking about the peripheral benefits. The peripheral benefits to actually doing the sport and turning up to a social environment and mixing and mingling with other kids. I mean, you know, I think about recruitment for sales roles. Recruitment for sales roles very commonly will have sports people that didn't quite make it. So sports people that try to go professional or semi-professional and it didn't work out. They got injured, they weren't good enough, something like that. These people turn up to interviews and they are personable, switched on, intelligent people. This is only anecdotal. I don't have the evidence for this, but I just can't see that being the same with people that didn't make it as esports players. People that didn't leave the house. The only social interaction they might have had will have been over the internet. So you've already taken out all body language because what you're saying there is it's only audio.
Non-verbal communication skills and building them is vital to human communication before language.
Exactly. So even if the content of your speech is really, really good, you're going to struggle to communicate and connect without those non-verbal cues, like you say. I just struggle to see that it's the same.
Footballers aren't notorious for their communication skills, are they?
They're not.
Whereas rugby players are, more so.
Yeah.
But this could come back to your cortex argument. Is like the people who play rugby go to better universities and have better communication skills anyway, and the kind of person that's attracted to playing rugby is more of that kind of person, and is football more of work like lower class kind of less educated backgrounds?
There does seem to be a difference, doesn't there, in terms of the working class? You know, seems to prefer football, whereas when you look at people in the West End, they're going to the rugby matches.
Yeah, the horse racing.
Yeah, a lot of the corporate gigs are taking your clientele to the rugby matches, like you say, the horse racing. But I think there is a difference there. It's hard to know. We'd have to look into it. Maybe, perhaps.
Maybe, perhaps.
So we're settled on it is a sport, yeah? Good. Now we can move on.
To fly in the face of is it a sport? So one of Gutman's rules is that it is play. For it to be a sport, it needs to involve play.
Yeah.
If you become a professional esports player, it's no longer play, it's a job.
Yeah, but when we're talking about play, are we not talking about the act of creatively leveraging the environment?
I don't know. What does he say?
I mean, that's what we're talking about psychologically with play. We're talking about the sort of creative leverage of the environment. The ability to play is to be creative and open and, you know, it's not a rule-based. It's not necessarily goal-oriented, for example. Not necessarily that you find it fun. There is a distinction, at least for Gutman. I mean, if you look at Gutman's specific definition, he says sports are autotelic physical contests. And by autotelic, he just basically means having an indoor purpose in and of itself. The outside world didn't bestow a meaning upon football. The rules of football bestow a meaning upon itself. So sports are autotelic physical contests. If you're looking at esports and video games, the fundamental distinction being video game players do it for the fun, then yeah, I mean, there is a big difference between those people and the people that do esports, because it really is a profession. They're grinding.
This is it. And this creates different motivations.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of it is based on motivations, and those motivations can change whether it's a sport or whether it's a game. What was interesting was that in this paper, who's it by? Abe Stein, Mia Consalvo, and Konstantin Mitkuch. So did you come across this paper?
No, I don't
Who
think
are
so.
sports gamers?
No, I didn't come across this one.
Okay, so this one is actually... Right, okay, so it's not a journal, it's actually from a conference.
Okay.
And the rationale for doing it was that basically sports games account for 16.3% of all games sold in the USA. Now, this is sports games.
Did you say 16 or 60?
16.3%
Okay.
of all games sold in the USA. And so sports games meaning like NHL, NFL, you know, UFC,
FIFA.
You know, exactly,
Yeah.
these kind of stuff. Motivations for this is there's a guy called Shipman in 2001 who looked at the history of fantasy sports.
Okay.
From pen and paper up to the online stuff. And what he came across was that for the players, the rhetoric that you get from them is one of empowerment and role-playing. They imagine themselves as the coach and the power to make decisions for the team, which kind of relates back to your restaurant in RuneScape.
I came across an article and I didn't save it down, but it said exactly the same thing.
Yeah, there you go. It was probably that Shipman 2001.
Maybe it was.
That was kind of extended in 2006 by Smith, Sharma, and Hooper. I don't know where they were from because I didn't look at it. These are all the references from this paper.
How dare you?
And that says that fantasy sports focus on decision making and mathematical stats.
Oh, really?
However, the decisions that you make are not reliant on excessive computation.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
You know, if you've got a fantasy character and you're looking at how good the sword is compared to another sword, it doesn't really take that much because you've got so much visual aid, you've got percentages laid out. It's either a green bar or a red bar. You're going to see, like, what's going to happen. It's not like you're not doing any Daniel Kahneman thinking fast and slow, you know, on this, really.
You're doing the thinking fast bit, aren't you?
Yeah, you're doing the thinking fast, but you're not really engaged with all the elements of that decision. It's just like you've got two swords, one's more powerful, you pick the more powerful one.
Take a heuristic, which
exactly.
one's easiest.
That's
I mean,
exactly.
to be honest, if you think about a game designer as well, you're not going to try and make it difficult.
Totally.
Because that's not enjoyable.
Totally. Is this what we were saying before? The slot machine kind of idea. Further to that, there was another paper by Farquhar and Meads, and what they tried to do was categorize types of online fantasy sports players, or types of players, to identify the most common types.
Yeah.
And they found basically three.
Okay.
You've got casual players, skilled players, and isolationist thrill seekers. Isolationist thrill seekers.
Okay.
So the motivations here are different because for the people who enjoyed stats, for the ones that's more of a highly involved kind of gameplay, their main motivation was they liked outsmarting people.
Yeah,
they liked being the one that came off best in that kind of battle of wits. And the less involved ones are more like just the thrill of victory, bragging rights. But then this is kind of also dependent on the kind of game you play. Basically, Sherry in 2006, and Greenberg 2010.
Yeah, so I came across Sherry.
Oh, so maybe you'll know about that because from what I got from it was they took patterns among high schoolers and grad school people.
5th, 8th and 11th graders.
Basically 9 and 10-year-olds.
Yep.
And 8th and 11th grade is 12 to 16. So I didn't know whether that included any because in the study it says 8th and 11th grade.
It does, yeah.
So I don't know if they meant 8th grade to 11th grade.
It's hard to know. I took it as 8th and 11th.
Yeah.
Because I believe they would have been more specific in their speech.
So that's basically only 12 to 13-year-olds and 15 to 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
What happens between 14, 15, 15, 16 isn't really brought up. But in the 5th graders, which is the 9 and 10-year-olds, they found that they preferred the competition and the challenge.
Yeah.
Whereas 12 to 13 and 15 to 16-year-olds preferred social aspect of it, certain arousing things, and also distraction.
This distraction point is an interesting one.
Because that's the most common factor amongst esports players and non-esports players is escapism.
So there's a couple of other studies that I don't know if you came across. There's one by Peter Vorderer and another one by Nick Yee.
I came across Vorderer and Yee, but not their particular papers I looked at.
Right, so they basically talk about motivations as well. So Vorderer, in his, there's a couple of papers. One, for example, Interactive Entertainment and Beyond in 2000. He talks about the interactivity component being a key one for people. And in another paper, which we'll put in the description, he talks about the competition aspect. And those are the two fundamental elements. However, Nick Yee basically dives into the problematic usage in his motivation for playing online games study.
Specifically MMORPG games.
Yeah, so online games we're talking about here. He essentially finds that escapism is the best predictor of problematic usage. Problematic usage being diagnosed by a sort of battery of tests. There are some sort of standard tests that you can deploy. Escapism, and you said distraction in the Sherry article, that, escapism is the best predictor of problematic usage. Because, of course, what are you trying to escape?
Yeah,
so you asked me earlier about RuneScape. Did I find any meaning in it? I'm not saying I was trying to escape anything, but you can very easily see that if you escape your life, you're not necessarily looking for meaning in what you're doing. You're just trying to guess away. You're averse to something else. You're not trying to seek any higher meaning or goal. It's just sort of you're trying to avoid pain, avoid suffering. This is simply a crutch to help you do that. So that's one of the more insidious things that can compel people to be video game players.
What was interesting about Yee, specifically with MMORPGs, he broke it down into 3 sections, am I right? He had the achievement factors, the social factors, and the immersion factors.
Exactly.
So escapism falls into the immersion factor, along with role-playing and customization. So how deep the mechanics of customization go was a strong thing. The social, obviously socializing certain relationships and teamwork were motivators for MMORPG players. But then just the advancement, mechanics, and competition related to achievement were also kind of important for them.
There is a gender difference here, though.
Oh, yeah?
So the female players scored higher on the relationship subcomponent. So you mentioned achievement, social, and immersion.
Yeah.
So, for example, the social component, there's the socializing bit. So that's the casual chat, the helping of others, the making of friends. There's also the relationship subcomponent of the social column, which is, being very personal, self-disclosing, finding and giving support. So the females scored much higher on that, but they didn't score any differently to the males on socializing. So men and women, they're both up for a casual chat. They're both there to help each other and make friends. But as the author says, they want very different things out of those interactions. Although there were a couple, I don't know if you saw the quotes that were clipped out. It says, asking MMORPG players why they play, reveals a wide variation of motives. The male says, currently I'm trying to establish a working corporation within the economic boundaries of the virtual world primarily, to learn more about how real-world social theories play out in a virtual economy. That was a male age 30. A female age 34 says, the fact that I was able to immerse myself in the game and relate to other people or just listen in to the chatter was appealing. I was like, I feel like you're interviewing fundamentally different types of people there. That bit ain't a gender difference. I would never have said that. I wasn't on RuneScape to explore the economic boundaries of life, love, and happiness. I was there to, sell some ham legs or whatever. I was just trying to
run a restaurant. You just wanted to run a restaurant.
I was loving it, mate. But I did think that was a curious choice. He could have picked any quotes.
Right.
Maybe he was just trying to show you the big difference. I don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe that's what it was. But that wasn't the gender differences section. I thought it was very strange. But it's different for eSports players. Well, it's kind of different. So actually, Thomas Weiss, he's a researcher in the Department of Business, Media and Technology Management in the University of Cologne, published a paper called Virtual Worlds in Competitive Context. And he had 360 eSports players in his sample. And he found that competition, challenge, and escapism, unfortunately, were the three main drivers of continuous esports use. On the other hand, there's another study by Dongan Lee and Linda Schoenstedt, I might have butchered that name, comparison of esports and traditional sports consumption motives in 2011, and they found there were only competition, peer pressure, and skill building that came up as significant predictors of, the motivation to be involved in esports. And that was 515 college students and athletic event attendees. So that's a slightly different sample. But
it's quite a mixed sample.
Yeah, that's quite a mixed sample. But that is that is still for esports, not just video gaming. So competition, peer pressure, and peer pressure simply there means knowing lots of other people who engage in esports, and skill building. And they did do an analysis on all sorts of other variables like diversion, entertainment, fantasy, social interaction. To pass time even was one of their variables. Graphics. I know I'm on there for graphics. But
that's to do with the flashy lights, the blinky light.
Is there a term, is there?
Yeah, there's a term, and it's to do with how something is built and made, and it relates to Griffith's work on the slot machine.
Yeah, I don't have that term to hand, but it does stimulate the dopaminergic... I'm not going to say it after a few gins.
Dopaminergic responses.
Yeah, well, those pathways in your brain. Because this is one of the things, just for anyone listening, is that when we say that these things release dopamine in your brain, it's basically shorthand for saying it activates specific neural pathways that run on dopamine. Not necessarily that we've just filled our brains up with a special type of chemical. And these are the sorts of pathways that are essentially involved in reinforcement. It's when you look at a tree and see an apple hanging on the tree, you get a shot of dopamine. Yeah, and then you get to the tree and you've completed a goal and you tick that off your list. It's another shot of dopamine. Simon Sinek does a really, really good talk.
That works with Yee's work on progression.
Yeah.
Especially with the MMORPGs, with the achievement thing.
Yeah, that's exactly what's running. It's those dopaminergic pathways. And those are the same pathways that are running in alcoholism, in many, many other forms of addiction. Screen addiction. Addiction runs on dopamine, essentially, and it's the same pathways that are running here. And dopamine in excess is actually neurotoxic, and it will degrade those pathways over time. And you'll need more and more in order to keep feeling those same feelings of completion and satisfaction. Hence why you need more and more alcohol, more and more screen time, more and more.
Can you get addicted to sports the same way you could get addicted to eSports in
Sure.
that same fashion?
Sure, I mean, there's endorphins in there. You can certainly become addicted to anything, and a lot of it's habitual as well. You know, you can certainly become addicted to sports. I was always of the opinion, though, that sports, physical sports, are not a bad thing to get addicted to. I mean, you may know, I've known people who have gone to the gym a bit too much. They might go to the gym twice a day. I mean, I worked with someone in the past who, after a breakup, was going to the gym twice, sometimes 3 times a day. And that isn't a healthy relationship.
It's a coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism. But I do feel like that leads to different outcomes than locking yourself away. It's like the person who closes the door on the world and opens up a whiskey. That's a different coping mechanism to one where you're going to an environment, improving your health, hopefully. That can still run amok, of course. And you are engaging in a personable, populated environment.
Because that's what Demetrovic tries to ascertain through his motivation of online games questionnaire. Competition's important, escapism's important, fantasy is important, skill development's important, recreation is important, social things are important, but coping is important. But aside from all those things, whether it's the social environment, whether it's, whether you want to become a mastery is very important. For some people, I think one study said that for solo players who play solo games, about 17% of them view mastery as being very important. The other thing is kind of how the game itself extends your existing life or improves on your existing life. And I don't know how prevalent this is in MMORPG players, people who play Warcraft or people who play Counter-Strike, for example, but it is prevalent in people who play sports games. So people who
Sports
play
games, not esports, but sports
games.
Okay.
This particular study, which I've mentioned before from this conference, well, it's not a study, it's findings for a conference, which is Consalvo, Stein, and Mitgutch. They wanted to find out who plays games and what makes them different from typical players, and how do they attach meaning to these game experiences.
Okay.
They basically ask questions about habits, preferences, personal play experiences, how they defined the fandom of their sport, and also collected basic demographic data. They ended up with about 1,309 respondents. They did these surveys through a website, but 56% of everybody who answered wrote down an experience. 91% of those people gave examples of significant experiences. Another important thing is that they didn't define meaning. So
They didn't define meaning.
They didn't define meaning, so they left meaning open for the respondents. What they did was they searched. They basically did word searches for the most common words, and the top terms that they came up with were friends and team.
Yeah.
And so what they found was certain repeating patterns.
Do you not think that a lot of this is to do with the destruction of the religious community? So if you think about it, before we had churches, and people would go to churches. You get your community. In fact, most of those that you just listed off, apart from maybe user-generated content, but a lot of those could be covered off by a religious community.
I think that a lot of these players are looking for meaningful experiences.
That's what I mean. We've gotten rid of that, and we've replaced it with nothing. I mean, that's one of the great problems of the secular community, of which I count myself a part. We haven't given anything compelling to attach meaning and purpose to.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because 95% of people who responded to this particular survey, they created their own character.
Okay.
In the game. 87% of them made a playable version of themselves.
Right.
And that's what they're saying might be an interesting avenue for future research, is why have they done that? Why did they do that? Why make a playable version of yourself in this virtual world? They're saying it's because most of them want their playing experiences to be somewhat simulative, and they want it to fit with their real-world understanding of real-world stuff.
Yeah.
So they want their gaming experiences to mirror reality in some fashion, or extend their actual love of that particular sport. One person said that they play games for fun and as an escape. I don't look for meaningful moments in sports, and I've played so many hours of sports games that no particular moment stands out.
God, that's sad.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Kind of.
It's just like it's ground down to a pulp. A pulp of playing video game.
That's it.
No spires on that landscape of meaning.
This is it. Some people have more family experiences. So one guy says here, participant, male. An important thing about this study is that almost all of them are male, white male USA people. So 98.4% of the respondents were male out of 1,309.
Okay.
1.6% identified as female. So this is sports games.
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about a very specific demographic here.
Exactly. But one of the stories that we get is the most meaningful memory I have of sports video gaming has to be how I got my start. So I guess like he's had a long life of playing sports video games.
Yeah, clearly.
He's saying, it was 1993, I was 10 years old, and I remember going to my grandmother's house for Sunday dinner every week. After dinner, my uncles, cousins, and family friends would all huddle around the upstairs TV with the Sega Genesis, that's the Mega Drive in this country, connected and takes turns playing John Madden Football 93. So this is Madden 93. I was a little kid amongst the other kids and adults, so no one ever took me seriously. I got beat at the game, sometimes badly, because I was young and the older kids and adults were all much better than me. I started to play solo at home, at first to get better, to be able to beat them, but then I started to enjoy it myself. So he's saying he didn't really enjoy it, he just wanted to get good at it to beat everybody else. I had always casually played sports games, but before this point, other genres had piqued my interest more. After training to beat the older kids and the adults, I became hooked on sports games. Even though the Sunday dinners and games around the TV have stopped, I still play fanatically. So I started to play solo at home, at first to get better to be able to beat people. And playing solo games rather than team games is more associated with mastery, achievement of a game as a motivation.
There is the question as well about the fact that they developed that amongst their family.
Yeah, so there's an association with family time was games time. It was awesome, but I wanted to be able to compete with my family.
Yeah, because I was watching, just the other day I was walking to the station and I saw a father and I saw a child kicking a ball. You know, it was a football goal. It was on a field somewhere. And I was just thinking about it. I was thinking, that kid is going to always associate, assuming this isn't a rare occasion, that kid is going to associate father-son time with football. So no wonder they grow up and they have a real connection to football. Because usually when I'm walking past that particular park, that field, it's football teams that are playing. And so I was thinking, in future, he'll be part of that football team and he'll replace the father with the friends and, that connection will be the main thing. But he won't realise that he's been brought into the act of playing football simply, almost quite deterministically, by the fact that it's all associations in his subconscious, largely, over years and years and years of conditioning.
That's true. It's like, that's why I follow Bolton every week.
Yeah, and that's why I play Wii Sports fanatically every day.
Thanks for listening to Abstracts. Our theme tune is Coffee by the brilliant Cambo. That track is on Free Music Archive along with more of Cambo's tunes. Link is in the description. You can also find links to the videos sampled in the intro and also a link to a downloadable PDF containing the journal references. We're not on social media as of yet, but if you want to get in touch and elevate our thinking, swing us an email to podcastabstracts@gmail.com. That's podcastabstracts@gmail.com. Thanks for listening and catch you next time.